Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Wāhine. Today you've got me, Harita, and I'm joined with Celia Wade-Brown, who some of you might know was once upon a time the Mayor of Wellington back in 2010 until 2016. She was an elected councillor for 14 years prior to that as well, so she's had a long history in politics. Prior to her local government career, Celia was a programmer, teacher, and IT analyst. She was born in London and has worked in Europe, Africa, and Australia before coming to New Zealand. Her Greens history began in the UK when she joined Greenham Common nuclear protests. She moved to New Zealand in 1983, and in 1992, she joined the New Zealand Greens Party and stood for Wellington City Council. She also stood as the Green Party candidate for the general elections in 1999, 2005, and 2020. Mayor Wade-Brown led the establishment of Wellington Water and the Regional Economic Agency, but firmly resisted wholesale council amalgamation. She strengthened business and cultural relationships between cities in Asia, Australia, and Wellington. She was a founding member of the New Zealand Internet Society and the founding chair of the 2020 Trust, which promotes equitable digital literacy. In 2002, Ms. Wade-Brown founded Living Streets Aotearoa, which is a walking advocacy organisation, and was the inaugural president until 2009. She led the city through the 2013 earthquakes, taking decisive action when the city should be open for people and business. In 2018, she organised with a great Living Streets Aotearoa team, Wāhine Walking, which is a celebration of 125 years of women's suffrage. Highlights included transgender women, Māori orators, and female politicians speaking at different locations in Te Whanganui-a-Tara. In 2020, she cycled Tour Aotearoa from Cape Reinga to Bluff. Celia also teaches English to refugees and migrants in New Zealand, amongst many other things that she's been doing since her political career. Miss Wade-Brown and her husband live in a solar-powered tiny house next to the Tararua Forest Park in the Carterton district. They've owned the land since 1987 and started building their house in 1991, and they moved over from the capital full-time in 2017. There is a QE2 covenant on a significant portion of the property, and regenerating areas are part of the ETS. In the Wairarapa, she is an active member of the landscape scale biodiversity project YP2K, which is Wairarapa Pukaha to Kawakawa, on the Carterton District Council Walking and Cycling Advisory Group, and she founded the Wairarapa Walking Festival, which has had 2 successful years showcasing the area to locals and visitors, including iwi, Pacifica, children, and businesses. Wow, you've achieved so much. And when I was researching you, there was so much more I wanted to include, but then I thought I can't because I will run out of my breath. So it's really nice to have you here, Celia. Thank you for putting aside the time for this interview.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome.
So I remember when you were mayor, actually. I was quite young back then, and I remember thinking, how cool is it that we have a female mayor? Because, you know, back then things like that were not as common as what they're becoming now. Yeah, so it's really cool that I've got to interview you. So I guess I kind of mentioned this in your bio, but if you could go into it a little bit more, what inspired you to get into politics back when you lived in London, and why did you choose the Greens Party in particular?
I grew up in a council flat in London, so I guess I was pretty aware of inequity, and there was I also became aware of racial discrimination at a young age. One of my really good friends was Carol Largett Wood, and she was from the Caribbean. And I remember her having, it must have been maybe a 7th birthday party, and she invited lots of people from the school, but very few of the white families turned up. And similarly, Vicky, who had an intellectual disability, there was a fireworks party at her house. And again, very few of her schoolmates turned up. So I think I was fortunate that my parents didn't discriminate and encouraged me to make friends. And that's always been a strong background, that lack of equity between different people. And then when I was in secondary school, we'd actually moved out of London by then. It was a pretty monocultural school, but one of my best friends was, she was an American Jew, and another one was, her name was Ruth Sinai, and we just caught up recently. And another friend was Lok Mai Yuen from Hong Kong. So this whole, the idea that different people have fascinating different backgrounds and histories, but that we shouldn't discriminate against each other was ingrained pretty early on. And then I took a gap year in West Africa. I was the laboratory assistant in a girls' school, helping with the chemistry and physics, because that's what I'd just done at school. And that was a fantastic opportunity, a bit like VSA, but earning less money. And yeah, and this whole thing that, the world is full of interesting people that have got all sorts of talents, and we shouldn't make judgments about them. And then as a 20-year-old, I really got into the nuclear-free movement in England. And I didn't actually join the Greens at that point. I went on protests at Greenham Common and marched against nuclear-armed aircraft and against the F-11s and so on. And I didn't really, I think I went to one Labour Party meeting in England, and it was so boring, and they're all about 30 years older than me, and they were talking about amendments to a motion for the AGM, and I just went, oh God, this is so boring, this is not for me, and forgot about politics for a while, and came over to New Zealand, got married, had my children, and was doing a bit of a beach cleanup because I love the ocean. And we were doing a beach cleanup, I think it was for Greenpeace, and sort of noting down what kind of items there were on the beach, cigarette ends and bits of plastic and bottles from South Asia and all sorts of stuff. And I met a Green Party councillor, and she asked me not just to join the Greens, but to stand for election at Wellington City Council. And some older listeners might remember Stephen Rainbow, and he was a councillor and ran for mayor, and he asked me as well, and I went along to the Green Party selection meeting and got selected to run in '92, and not really having a great history of involvement in local body, I wasn't successful. And I think I always encourage politicians, people who might want to be politicians, to say, if you don't get on the first time, don't give up. Learn a bit more, find out, get a bit deeper into the issues. And I got particularly interested in keeping Capital Power, which is a power organisation, and also in the state of the social housing in Wellington. The reason I joined the Greens rather than any other party was partly because they had some younger people, and partly because I like the 4 principles. You've got ecological wisdom, social justice, appropriate decision making, and non-violence. And you add that to a commitment to Harita, and you've got a really well-rounded set of guidelines for making any kind of decision. Whereas sometimes people say the Greens should be an environmental party only. And I think, how could you vote for a party when you don't know what they're going to do about benefits or tax or housing or things like that, the cost of living? You need to have a well-rounded picture. So that's why I joined the Greens.
Yeah, and I think that still stands now, right? Like the Greens members of Parliament are, I think they're the youngest party, like overall. You know, you got like Chloe Swarbrick and there's Gina, who's not in Parliament, but she's running to be on the Greens, Tamitha, and they're all so young. Like when you're comparing to Labour and National and most other parties, I think Greens got like the youngest caucus currently in Parliament as well. And yeah, it's not just about climate, but they look at how everything entwines with the climate. And take a holistic approach. And that's probably why they're becoming a lot more popular over the years as well, because a lot of the things they say actually make a lot of sense because they're looking at the whole picture, not just one thing.
And we do try to be evidence-based.
Mm.
And, it's quite frustrating with some of the dog whistle politics about whether it's about climate change or tax or race. We get frustrated with that, but we try and be positive and promote our own policy.
Yeah. So you were the mayor of Wellington from 2010 to 2016, but you were only the third ever female mayor of Wellington, following Kerry Prendergast, which obviously means Wellington had not had a female mayor in a very long time. And, for you to be only the third female mayor in 2020 says a lot. But what perspective do you think women can bring to the role that maybe men can't, or what can women bring to the role differently to men?
Well, first of all, I remember when I was running in 2010, somebody said to me, "Oh, I don't think we need another female mayor." And as you say, I was the 34th mayor and the third woman. So there were 31 men to three. I mean, that's 10, less than 10% were women. So, people have some funny attitudes. Um, I think it's an interesting question because you can't rely on all women having positive policies. I mean, from my point of view, if you look at Margaret Thatcher in England or Judith Collins, I don't agree with their policies at all. But perhaps in general, and you could take people like Marilyn Waring or Jeanette Fitzsimons or, some of the Labour women. In general, we probably understand the role of unpaid labour particularly well because statistically we do more of it. Childcare, housework, cooking, running errands for other whānau, and of course looking after older people as well. It often falls to women, not always. I have to say I've got a husband who doesn't help me with the house. He shares the work. In fact, he might do more of it, to be honest, especially when I was there. But on average, we're more likely to remember the needs of children and the needs of the elderly because we have more to do with them. And I wonder if that's why, on the whole, women are more likely to vote Green and vote Labour than men in the same age groups. Trying to find the research for that is quite difficult to actually see, but I know that I have seen those differences in voting patterns. Being at the older end of the Green candidate compared to, say, Chloe, I've certainly found that there was a bit of discrimination when I wanted to do science at school, which was fine. But I remember when we had to choose an option, they assumed that I should do food tech. Well, food tech is really important and it's fine if you want to do it, but I didn't want to do it. I wanted to do metallurgy. So I had to create all of my own, pull together my own equipment and things like that. Melting metals and cutting things up and doing metal fatigue for me was much more fun than food tech. And then when I left university, I went in, worked for IBM. And in those days, computing was, again, far more men than women in computing. And local government used to be a bit like that. I don't think it's so much the way now, particularly amongst councillors, and there are younger people as well. But it's certainly when I first went along to local government conference, oh my goodness, I think I had my 40th birthday. And it was fantastic because I felt 40 and being female was really young and lively, which is a great present on your 40th birthday. So yeah, and then I'm quite pleased with Julianne Genter, who is Minister of Women. for 3 years, what that would be 2017 to 2020, and helped achieve the appointment of 50% women to government boards and committees. And she's been a very vocal advocate for gender equity. Now, Julianne Genter was Minister for Women from 2017 and managed to achieve the target of 50% women on state sector boards and committees, which was good, because those are important organisations. And she also was instrumental in getting the Equal Pay Amendment Act into legislation. And that's really about women working in female-dominated industries where you might not have both genders equally represented, but you can say that there are equivalent jobs in more male-dominated industries. And what was remarkable about that was that it was unanimously agreed by all MPs from all parties in Parliament. So, you know, when the Greens can bring something forward like that and bring it forward without unnecessary argument, then that can be very persuasive. Yeah. But going back to that question about what women can bring, I think most women recognise that affordable childcare, secure housing where you know where you're going to be in a month's time, and decent public transport are going to get more people into work than benefit sanctions, which are only going to harm the children. So, yeah. And both Fran Wild, she was the first woman mayor of Wellington, and Kerry Prendergast, they were socially liberal, you know, they supported same-sex marriages, they were against forms of discrimination, and they supported the arts very strongly. Yeah. But there were significant policy differences, which is why I ran against Kerry. I wanted more money going into the cycling network, because it would have taken probably a whole century to get as far as we've got in the last 10 years at the budget we did have, and pushing for light rail and protecting nature more. So, you know, those are some important things. I also don't think she would have agreed with the living wage movement, and we were the first council in New Zealand to give our staff the living wage. And you think of people like lifeguards and some of the junior librarians and security staff and cleaners, they were not getting the minimum wage, and those are important, essential jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all really important. And I guess, like, especially living wage now, with cost of living getting higher and higher every day, if people aren't earning a living wage, then, you know, what can they do? So now it just goes without saying, right, that people need more than minimum wage, and living wage is actually not even really enough for a lot of people anymore. It's the bare minimum. Yeah, so it's good that that was started, and also, yeah, a lot of the other projects. And obviously you were in for 2 terms, so Wellingtonians obviously had their faith in you because they voted you in again for a 2nd term. Also, under your leadership as mayor, Wellington maintained its rank as the 12th highest city for quality of life in the world back in 2015. But currently, New Zealand has a cost of living crisis, and to be honest, I don't know where New Zealand or Wellington sits on this ranking anymore. But I did actually hear something that New Zealand is the 7th most expensive country to live in the OECD, I think it is. I heard it on the radio. It was a legitimate research, but I'd heard it on the radio in passing, and I thought, oh wow, like that's really saying a lot. In countries like Australia are cheaper for New Zealanders to live in, when you look at the fact that cost of living is a bit cheaper and people also earn slightly better salaries there. So what needs to be done in Wellington and New Zealand as a whole to make daily life more affordable for the people that live here?
If I start with the country, and then I might say a few things about towns and cities, but really New Zealand is overall a relatively wealthy country. If you take our median income, it's not bad. But the trouble is the inequality has grown, and inequality is the biggest cause of crime, ill health, and mental stress. It's a really, really big issue, and the Greens minimum income guarantee will go a long way to addressing that. It's a minimum income of $385 per person, and a bit more if you've got for the first child and other children. And it works whether you're a student, whether you're unemployed, or whether you're an apprentice. And it would just give people a bit more security, allow them to lead a dignified life. I mean, one of the things with those people who are on below the living wage is they were working 2 or 3 jobs. And some of the students didn't have time to study. The parents weren't available ever to go to any of the school evenings to meet the teachers. It creates a whole lot of problems. But we can only do the minimum income guarantee and the free dental care, which would certainly make a big difference to cost of living, if we have a fairer tax system. And the majority of New Zealanders agree that we should have a fairer tax system. They want, we proposed a wealth tax this time. We proposed a capital gains tax last time, which was ruled out, sadly, by Labour in both cases. But we think that they need to start listening to not just the Greens, but to the majority of Kiwis. We're not saying it's got to be the most radical in the universe, but most countries, especially those whose services we admire, they have either a capital gains tax or a wealth tax, and they have some higher tax brackets that are taxed a bit more, because it's just not fair that investors and bankers and property owners, when you've got multiple properties, they should pay at least as much rate of, at least as high a tax rate as nurses and tradies and factory and farm workers. Otherwise, it's not fair. I mean, they looked at those, I think there's 311 richest individuals, and they're paying less than 10% real tax rate, which is just not fair. So we also support capping rent increases, and also making sure that rentals are meant to be dry and healthy and have heating, but sadly not enough do. And it's no good having standards if they're never inspected. I mean, if you've got a car, you can't just say that the brakes work. You have to have it checked every now and again. And I feel it's a house is the same. Maybe it wouldn't have to be checked all that often. It might be every 3 or 5 years, or when the rental changes hands or something. But you can't just rely on there are good landlords who've done the right thing, but they're undercut by really poor landlords as well. And then there are community initiatives, and the Greens are very supportive of things being done at a local scale. So community gardens, shared meals, teaching kids in schools how to grow vegetables and other things would be great. I went to a really nice community meal in Woodville, because you have this huge electric, it's not just the Wairarapa, as you might know it, from Wellington that goes to Marston. It goes all the way up through Woodville and Dannevirke and up to Waipukaro and Waipawa. But anyway, Woodville, they've started this year a community meal on a Monday, where a restaurant and bar owner offers their kitchen up, and people come in and cook on a voluntary basis, and the guests are just people from the local community, and they put in what they can afford as a koha. And I think that that's really important stuff. So I do think more Greens will make a difference by telling the stories of people who are really doing it tough. It's no good just knowing your mates in the banking world who are doing fine, thank you very much.
Yeah, and then that way I guess the rich are getting richer and the poor are just getting poorer, because if you are lucky enough to own a couple of investment properties, and if you're not being taxed as much as income tax, you're just going to keep getting rich because you're earning more and more, while the people that are renting are just never getting out of that cycle.
And the same with inherited wealth. If there's no somebody in the family might have worked jolly hard, but on the other hand, they might have just earned, just inherited a number of properties from their family, and it doesn't seem fair that they get such a much better start than somebody who's, the daughter of a nurse or the son of I don't know, a carpenter or whatever. We used to be a much more equal country. And I don't know if you've read The Spirit Level. There's a very interesting book, and it actually looks at the comparative difference between top and bottom wage earners in different countries. And America is very unequal. Japan's very equal, and it shows how crime and ill health are related not just to poverty levels themselves, but also to inequality, to what people are seeing around them. Yeah, and having, you see some people that are very rich in your society, you have less contentment with what you have if you're in the middle as well. It's not a recipe for a happy country.
Creates jealousy and a lot of societal problems when you think you don't have certain things because the rich people around you have got all of that, and creates all that antisocial behavior as well, which like you said, then leads to crime and a lot of other societal problems. So I wanted to know, you were mayor for 2 terms, but in 2016 you decided not to run again during those elections. So what was behind the decision not to run for a 3rd term?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, all in all, I've been 20 years in local government by the end of 2016, and I thought 2 things. First of all, I wanted a succession plan. I'd seen with other mayors, you got projects kicked off that, and if it just swaps to somebody with a very different view, those projects could get lost. And I'd asked Justin to be my deputy in 2013, and I thought he had an option in a way to potentially stand for a Harita or another electorate. And I said, look, I don't really want you to be my deputy for a year and then have to go off campaigning, and I've got to find another one. So if you agree to be my deputy for 3 years, if you want to be mayor, because neither of us knew whether he was going to do that at that point, then I'll stand down and give you a clear run. So it was a good deal. In a way, I would have quite liked to have done another 3 years, but it had been quite tough because all of my 6 years were with the National Party in central government. I mean, we worked on a number of things together. We'd worked on Pokiahu National Memorial Park, 150th celebrations, the cenotaph. It wasn't I tried to find things that I could work on with national government, but it was quite tough. So so I asked him, and he decided that he did want to run. And I had family overseas that I wanted to see. My older boy lives in America, and my sister lives in London, so it was good to see both of them. And I had a few other things I wanted to do before I got too old and creaky to do them. And my husband and I went and walked Te Aroha, which is 3,000 kilometres, the length of New Zealand. Wow. That was complete change from politics, because in politics, some things you work really, really hard on and you don't get there. And other things just happen really easily. I remember the very first budget that we set when I was a new councillor. They had social grants, they had sports grants. And I said, well, why didn't you have environmental grants? And they all went, well, that's a good idea. And there, bang, I didn't have to lobby and work and count the numbers. It just went in. And walking every day for 5 months in total, we did it in a few different steps. You get where you're going day by day by your own efforts. So it was a really good political detox, I call it. And spending nights in tents and dock huts and the occasional hotel or motel is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I guess you probably need that after, like, a political career is not a 9 to 5 job. It's like, it's your whole life during that term, right? Like every politician that we've interviewed at the moment, they've all said like in the weekends, they're out doing as much as they can in the community. If it's a sitting week, they're in Wellington half the week and their electorate half the week. But it's not it's not like, okay, I'm at work now. Okay, now I'm at home. It's like, it's your job for that many years straight.
Yeah, well, Mayor of Wellington was it was both very interesting and quite tough, because being the capital, we had a lot of national events, and we also had to work with the diplomats. It was quite important to keep the diplomats happy in the town they were living in, not just the sort of interactions they might have at a national level with the government.
Yeah. So
you have
to be everywhere at once.
Loving Wellington. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a busy job. I can imagine. So yeah, it makes full sense that you want to make the most of your life, while you still can, rather than
I
going for
remember Anzac Day, which for a lot of people is a holiday. They might go to one Anzac Day service. Well, I started dawn service, and then I went to the Wellington City service, and then I went to the national 11 o'clock service, and then I went to the Ataturk memorial with the Turkish ambassador and Turkish people. And then sometimes we had a concert in the evening. So that, I think sometimes that was the longest day of the year.
It is, yeah. And like you said, for most of us it's a public holiday, but if you got to go to so many different events, like I think that's what the general public don't always understand, right? Like, it's political people have to kind of be at as many events as they can, because they are the face of Wellington in so many ways.
Yeah, and they were, I enjoyed going to events, whether it was, festivals, or of course, we were very lucky over those 6 years. There was the Rugby World Cup, the Cricket World Cup, the Hobbit World Premiere. But, it's still being on call all the time.
Yeah, very busy. So I guess, like, now you're coming back into politics, you're campaigning to be part of the Greens after a few years hiatus, and you were selected as the Greens Party Wairarapa candidate back in 2020 and again this year. So if you're elected, what would you hope to do for your electorate?
Yes, well, I feel I've walked and cycled and kayaked enough for a little while, so I can go back to debating and trying to get the best of the Greens policies into law, and get the budget and the tax system fairer. Now, our negotiations, it'll be quite a challenge what we can get through, depending on what the outcome is. And obviously, we've all seen the polls, but the polls are not set in concrete. It depends on what people actually vote. The Greens would like to make a fairer tax system, get our free dental care in, fund docs so that we can do predator-free properly. I mean, both major parties have supported the idea of predator-free. National even kicked it off, but didn't fund it properly. And I have to say, Jobs for Nature and Eugenie's work were really good. The other things that I'm very interested in is getting the oceans bill through. There's an international call for more protection of the oceans, and while New Zealand's not a huge country land-based or population, we are a very big country in the marine realm. So if we could protect 30% of our marine area by 2030, working with the iwi, then that would be fantastic. Now, as far as the Wairarapa electorate goes, there's a number of things. I'm keen that not only do we continue with the new trains that are on order, but that we look at extending the route as it used to go from Masterton all the way up to Hawke's Bay, and also from Woodville through to Palmerston North. Now, there are some connections that should be made by passenger rail and get more freight onto rail, and that would do a lot for road safety, do a lot for lots of people who can't drive, either because they can't afford a car or maybe can't afford the petrol, or because they've got some visual disability or something like that that makes it difficult for them to drive, and they get forgotten, especially in a rural electorate sometimes. So lots of public transport that we could do. The planning starts in November for the 2024 budget. So depending on who's leading the government, will be more or less effective there. But even so, the more Greens there are, the more people we can talk to from other parties and try and make our points. I don't want to see the climate emergency fund used for tax cuts for the rich. I think we can try and argue our case that there should be more of that money recycled to reduce emissions. I mean, National has said that they want to keep to our 2030 targets. Given they've been voting against all of the policies that might get us there, it's difficult to see. But once they're in government, they'll have the responsibility for, the next emissions reduction plan, if they are in government. So, we can help with some ideas there, that's for sure. And Jeanette Fitzsimons, who was our co-leader for a long time, absolutely fantastic. She got the first Healthy Homes insulation program started, nearly 20 years ago, and that has survived changes in government. So that's pretty good that she's been able to keep that going through Labour-led and National-led. And another example is she was instrumental in getting the Sustainable Farming Fund up and running, because there's a lot of farmers doing the right thing, but there are some that maybe they haven't read so widely, or maybe they're being led astray by groundswell, or I don't know, but they don't seem to realise that if they're doing exports, then the international markets are demanding higher environmental management, and not just greenwash, they're demanding proof of lower emissions and less pollution of waterways. So we need to help farmers get there rather than make this false rural urban divide. So
especially when that's one of New Zealand's biggest exports.
Sorry.
When it's one of New Zealand's biggest exports, like, we have to take care of that industry, otherwise you don't want that falling apart, because that would have huge economical repercussions for the country as well.
It would, and there are lots of good ways of doing farming. There's some amazing work being done on an electric cherry orchard down in Otago, and they've got electric tractors, who's I think the most exciting, but they've also got electric frost fans and electric irrigation, and they're really reducing their emissions very rapidly. There's a Waikato dairy farm that has cut its carbon dioxide equivalent by a quarter over 4 years. And the other thing is that a lot of people don't realise is that farms on average have reduced their emissions by 7% over 4 years. So it's going down, but it's too slow. And the pace of change is too slow, for both for poverty reduction and for climate change action.
Yep. Yeah. And there's still a lot more that we need to do. And that's why they're all kind of scrambling to try to get there by 2030. One question I kind of had, not related.
Putting off trading for agriculture is just kicking the can down the road rather than helping farmers get on the front foot. And again, there's quite a lot of good examples. I think what I'm really looking forward to, compared to being mayor, is being part of a green team. I mean, it's a really diverse team. We've got younger members like Chloe and Lan Farm and lots of different people. We've got Fiso Collins and Teano Tuiono, and I really admire both James Shaw and Marama Davidson. So it's a great mix. You've got some people with rural expertise, you've got people with freshwater expertise, and we will be listening to evidence and working really hard in select committees and with private members' bills, and of course out and about in the communities. I'm looking forward to sorting out the portfolios after October the 14th so that everyone can contribute effectively for the next term of government.
Yeah, that's really cool. One question I have in relation to like some of the campaign promises that the Greens Party have been making, and this is maybe it's just out of ignorance, but I was wondering, because it's like Greens would most likely go into co-governance with Labour, not National, but some of the policies that Labour have announced are kind of conflicting with some of the things Greens have announced. One of the ones that stands out to me is the dental care one at the moment. So Labour have announced that they would give free dental care to people under 30, whereas Greens have said they would give free dental care to everyone. So if Labour wins the election, and then if they go into co-governance with Greens, how does it get decided, like on a bill like that, where you've kind of got two conflicting ideas on the same thing? How would it get decided which one actually becomes the policy?
Well, the first thing is that my view is that both on the recent solar announcement and Labour's dental care, that Greens' bolder policy announcements have actually shifted Labour a bit. So to some extent, we've already made a difference. The more Green MPs we have, the stronger our negotiating position will be, really. There are quite a lot of more progressive Labour members that if there's a good number of Greens, we should be able to move things. And it may end up being a compromise. It might be able to be, a bit older than 30, but not absolutely everybody yet. The most critical thing is to get a fairer tax system, because our plans for free dental care, for a minimum guaranteed income, and so on, do depend on that they're fully costed, but they do depend on a fairer tax system.
Yeah, so definitely.
It will be hard work to get there, but I think we can get there. And as you say, as I said earlier, if you look at the Equal Pay Amendment Act, we didn't just get there wasn't just support from Labour and the Greens, there was support from everybody. So I think there is trying to find common ground and remind people that we are all in this together.
Yep, that's very true. So slightly off the political stream, but you were a founding member of Internet New Zealand in 1995 and Living Streets Aotearoa in 2002. So for those of our listeners that might not have heard about these, can you explain what these organisations do and why you wanted to set them up?
Well, the Internet New Zealand, I was on their first elected council. It wasn't me setting it up, but I was one of the inaugural councillors. And that was all about getting domain names set up within New Zealand and giving people good access to digital services. I did a lot of work in 1995, 96, also with what was then called the 2020 Trust. And we made sure that refugees and community groups and so on had access to computers and could not just search, but put their own information up. So there's a lot of work in digital inclusion. And we made the assumption that, in 20 years or so, that wouldn't be needed anymore. And we were wrong. I mean, there's still great demand for people, perhaps older people or people with less education or people who've come from different countries. There's a huge demand for access to online resources, and trying to take a critical approach so that people don't get scammed. I'm really pleased to see that there's work to reduce the chances of people being scammed out of their money. but it's not just money scams. It's conspiracy theories, people who won't believe in scientific evidence, people who, take climate change. The vast majority of international scientists, and all of the national institutions of scientists, are all quite clear that humans have caused the majority of the recent climate change. But you will still meet one or two people in a public meeting who'll say, well, I've read scientists that say it's different. Well, we need to help, rather than writing these people off, we need to help people have enough scientific literacy so they can judge for themselves that one is not a credible position.
Yeah.
So, and Living Streets, I got involved with Living Streets when I was on the Wellington City Council Road Safety Committee, and they had the AA, they had truck drivers, they had motorcyclists, they had cyclists, but they didn't have anyone for what I still think is the most important mode of transport, walking. Cities, the lifeblood of a city is footfall. It's the people walking. Nobody's going to catch buses or trains if you can't safely walk to the bus stop, cross the road, get off the bus is coming the other way, and stations need to be well lit. And also there's a lot of people use wheelchairs or push chairs, and they need to be able to have smooth footpaths and things like that. And we just felt, a group of us founded it with actually a woman who is low vision, blind, legally blind, and we just felt that people weren't listening enough to the needs of walkers, whether they are on their own 2 feet or whether they're in wheelchairs, whether they're mobility scooters and so on. So I'm very delighted that since I stood down for being president, there have been a couple of really good presidents, and they've carried on the fight. We listened to by Waka Kotahi, we listened to by a number of councils. It's a great organisation. We have the Golden Feet Awards. So we give out every 2 years, there are awards. It might be for a really good walk to school initiative, or it might be something like a pedestrian bridge, or there are all sorts of different things that we give out recognition for. That's quite important.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also promoting, it's promoting walking in the country as well by having the awards. Like, people would be inclined to think of ways to make the country better for pedestrians as well, knowing that, if we think of something really awesome, we might get this award out of it as well, like an incentive.
I was just listening to a radio program when I was coming back for this interview, and they were talking about how for older people, they need to have, 150 minutes of exercise a week at least. Well, one of the easiest ways to get that is on your daily errands. If you can actually walk to the shops, or walk to your bridge club, or walk to the community garden, or walk your grandchildren to school or something, then it's easy to rack up those minutes. And it helps bone strength and heart health and all of those good things. But it's also eyes on the street. The more people that are walking, the safer it is to be walking.
Yeah.
So I am very passionate, and that's one of the reasons I founded the Wairarapa Walking Festival, because it's a fantastic area for walking, whether you're walking up big tramps in the Tararua range, or along the beaches. Wairarapa's got lovely beaches, but we've also got quite a lot of heritage walks. We've got some of the old buildings in Carterton. We've got Huranui-o-Rangi Marae is leading walks, and we've got some very soggy walks in the Wario wetlands. So keep an eye out for that in November, from the 10th to the 19th of November, and most of them are free.
Oh, that's cool. Really good way for people to get out there and explore their backyard, right?
Yep.
So as we wrap up to the end of this interview, I guess, you've been in politics, whether it's local council or Greens Party, but you've been involved for quite a while, so I'm sure you've had some funny and a lot of memorable moments in your political career. Would you mind sharing some of them with our listeners?
One of the sweetest moments, and this is quite literally, was when I'd announced that I was standing down as mayor. This young boy, who I'd met a few times, and I knew his father. His father was one of the roading contractors, and I got this message saying they wanted to come in and see me. And he had made an imitation of the mayoral train with chocolates, chocolates with their gold wrappers.
Yep.
And he tied them all together and he made this lovely copy of the mayoral train. So that was really sweet. I met some amazing people. Often the volunteers in our community, sometimes there'd be people who were social housing tenants helping other social housing tenants. And that was all sometimes the most generous people are the people who have got leased themselves. That was pretty cool. And then I met some very famous people, called Hillary Clinton. And that was interesting because she arrived at the military end of the Wellington airport. I think she was due at 5:30 or 6 in the morning or something. And it was a fantastic summer day. It was mid or late November. And so I just hopped on my bicycle from Island Bay to the airport. It's not terribly far. It was a lovely day. And I got a suit on and probably had a pair of bike shorts under the suit, but I was perfectly smartly dressed, turned up, put the bike to one side and really thought nothing of it because that's how I got around a lot. Turned up, met this woman who is she's quite tiny, but very charismatic, and exchanged about 2 or 3 sentences. And this was probably, this would have been within maybe 2 months of being elected as mayor, so I was still finding my way. So it was quite, I was quite nervous of meeting her, but it all went very well. And I suggested she walked along the waterfront if she could persuade her bodyguard, and they let her walk along the waterfront, which is nice. But what hit the news was one of the journalists had seen me arrive on my bike. So the headlines were "Mayor cycles to meet Secretary of State." And, I could imagine everyone was thinking that I would have been wearing lycra and all sweaty and all that. And of course I wasn't. I was very respectful of any foreign dignitary. And that was very funny. And apparently it made the top 10 cycling stories in the States that year. Quite ridiculous. And and I have met Julia Gillard and all sorts of interesting people. I really enjoyed meeting the mayors in China when I went there, and we also made Seoul a sister city. And there've been some really interesting international connections. And Wellington's got to keep reminding the world that we're a great city, that we're public service for sure, but we're also IT, film, technology, and just a beautiful place to live. And I think one of the most special things that I've seen, probably the most memorable, that we kicked off, the 2 memorable things that we started when I was mayor, but we're only just seeing the fruits of it. It was so moving to go and see Tory Whānau open the Tākina Convention Centre, because we had a big debate and I supported buying the land for that. Not everybody supported that. And now we can see that it's a big success.
Yeah.
And the other one is, it's probably the last thing I did as mayor, was signed off an agreement with Greater Wellington and the Next Foundation to become predator-free Wellington. And we didn't know how hard it was going to be and whether it would be effective and so on. And now we're just about down to the last few rats on Miramar Peninsula, moving across the rest of the city, beginning in the whole Brooklyn, Island Bay area. We'll get to Woodridge in the north in a few years. But people are seeing such a difference. And Zealandia, of course, releasing the birds has made a big difference. but they wouldn't be surviving and breeding and delighting people with the Dawn Chorus without the work that both volunteers and paid staff have made such a difference. So going to stay with my friend on the Miramar Peninsula and seeing geckos in her laundry basket that you wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago.
Yeah. That's really cool. You've done so many awesome things in your career, and there's still so much to go. We wish you all the best for the elections, and whatever the outcome is, like, you're a real force to be reckoned with. Like, it's so cool to just see, like, you get really into whatever you've put your mind to, and you really make a difference, which is what we really need right now. So we wish you all the best with elections, and it's been so lovely chatting to you tonight.
Oh, it's been lovely talking to you, and thank you for doing the interview. And the mayor can be a bit of a figurehead, but we can only make a difference if there's lots of people working, council staff, volunteers, businesses. You've got to all work together, and it's the same in the country as a whole.
It's so true. Thank you.